Today is April 19th, 2017. We're in the offices of the Doneger Group talking to John Pomerantz for the Fashion Institute of Technology.
And you are?
And I'm Alex Joseph. I'm the managing editor of FIT's magazine, Hue. Good. John, maybe for context, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
My childhood was spent in the five towns of Long Island called Lawrence. And we had a house there, we lived there. And I was going to Lawrence. I was in fourth grade, I guess, fifth grade. No, I was in sixth grade. And I had something happened, I can't tell you what it was now, with my teacher. And for a couple of days I was pushed back to fourth grade, and I had to sit on a high stoop with a cone's hat on my head.
Oh.
And the next thing I know, I'm sent to military school.
Oh. Oh my. Do you recall what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, I always thought I'd be in the clothing business.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because my father was in the clothing business.
Of course. Right. Can you tell me about what was your formal education?
Well, I ended up going to this school called Admiral Farragut in sixth grade. I graduated from there in 1951, and I went to the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. I graduated in 1955, and then I came to work for Leslie Fay. I worked in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
Right, and Leslie Fay was your father Fred's company, correct?
My father Fred's company was Leslie Fay. It was moved from New York to Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and most of the work that had to be done was done there to make a dress.
I remember reading in your oral history that you lived in the factory. Is that true?
I had a bedroom in the factory. Well, my father used to, he'd be in the office by 7 o'clock in the morning. So I had to be in the office by 7 o'clock in the morning. And the office of the factory was right next to my bedroom. I can't say it was fun living in a factory, but I lived in a factory. And I have to stay working at the factory until he went home. Like everybody else.
Now, as I understand it, the Leslie Fay company invented the category of petite. Is that correct?
During the Second World War, people couldn't get fabrics to make clothing. So he started making some clothing for the military. They gave him sizes to make, and he thought that it was crazy. So he made a couple of styles in both sizes, his size and the size that they gave him. The size they gave him was pretty close to a petite size. He shipped them to Filings in Boston both ways, and the new size flew out of the store. The war ended, and he went to open up Leslie Fay. Leslie Fay fits you to a T if you're 5'4" or under, and the T was like where they measure how wide you are.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I read that your father was one of the founders of FIT. Is that true?
I never knew if he was a founder or not. I think you have to know who he was.
Okay.
He was a very strong man with fifth grade education. He never finished after fifth grade. He was working in the industry for a family who had a company in Boston. So he never finished his education, but when I think of it, I was thinking of it last night, he was rather, one of the finest, strongest advocates of education, especially for women.
Especially for women. Did you have any other jobs aside from garment industry work?
No.
No. You went straight from working in the factory to working in the industry?
Well, what I did was I went to Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, graduated. I went there in the summertime so that I wouldn't be drafted to go into for the Korean War. And I finished, I had plenty, because of the summertime, my senior year I didn't have that many things to do, to graduate. So I graduated in the summer of '55.
Wow.
And went to work there.
What person do you think had the most positive influence on your life?
I'm pretty sure it's my father.
It was your father.
Yeah. Probably had some negative ones too. But
Do you remember what did he do or say that influenced you?
the one thing that I grew up with is that a saying that said, anything you want to do, if you want to do it hard enough, you can do it. And that's the way I led my life, with that.
Do you remember how you first learned about FIT?
It was through my father.
Through your father.
Yeah. Don't forget, I was working in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania for a number of years, and I came back here. What year I came back here? Probably 58 or 59. And then I started hearing things about FIT from, he was such a strong supporter of FIT.
Do you know why? Do you remember what?
Because he was a fifth grade guy who never had any education above fifth grade. And he was probably one of the strongest advocates of education in America at that time. And he wanted people to go. He figured if they go to school and go to work, they can't do something else, which isn't good. And he taught me that too. Or I learned that from him. He didn't teach really. He used to say, I don't know how to teach, you have to learn.
Right. I read that in his oral history, or in your oral history from earlier. You said, he said to you, I don't teach you this industry, you learn it. So I'm assuming he meant you have to go out and actually do things in the industry.
He was, you could try new things, but you really had to work at those new things and try to know that those new things really shouldn't be new. They should be doing it now. And when we did those new things, we got successful.
Do you remember your first impressions of the college? The first time you saw it, the first time you went there, the first time?
First time I saw it, I thought it was little, small. But as I got to know a little about it, I fell in love with it. And one of the things it did, and I know my father felt this way, I'm sure. We never discussed this, but I know he did, is that it was, at those times, it was really a school for New Yorkers. It's grown so right now, but then it was a school for New Yorkers. And if you went to school and you were a female, you weren't on the street. That was one of the most important things that he could think of, and became one of the most important things I think of too. To how to teach women to have this education, to go to the next step in their life.
You must have first become aware of the college in the 1950s, so before we even had the big buildings on 7th Avenue.
When I first saw the school, I thought it was so little. I didn't know how they could exist with such.
Did you know of the school when it was still in the High School of the Needle Trades?
They had that, yes. I didn't know much about that though, but I'd hear about that.
So you knew about it mostly when we had the building on 27th Street at the time that building went up in 1959.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
The head of the union worked there. I'm going to give you his name in a minute. I'm not prepared for this. Chick Chaikin.
Oh, okay.
He was. He was. If we could be friends by being adversaries, we were.
Okay.
And there was. The union had a lot to do with that school. Or the school had a lot to do with the union.
Was that the International Ladies Garment Workers Union at that time?
Yes.
Did you know David Dubinsky by any chance?
My father knew him better than I do. I knew him. I met him, but I never did any work with him.
Oh.
No.
He must have been quite a character.
He was, yeah. And then when I took over, there was a kind of Chick Chaikin, and he was there for a lot of years too.
Do you remember what year you started on the board at FIT?
I don't.
Okay. All right.
I don't.
Probably sometime in the 60s or 70s or something like that.
I started on the board. There was a gentleman from Macy's who was on the board also. And I had his name before you came, and I lost it in mind. So give me a few minutes, and we'll get back to him.
We'll come back. He was a retailer. Or?
He was a retailer.
Okay. And
he was the number 2 retailer at Macy's. There was a guy named Ed Finkelstein, who probably everybody's heard of, who was running for them. His name was Art Weiner. Art Weiner. He was a great guy, and through the years, he and I became the 2 leaders of FIT. We had a group, and we'd have meetings, and he and I were the 2 leaders. And I think at that time he was the leader and I wasn't.
Okay. Do you remember what you talked about in terms of what the school should do or what it was trying to do?
We talked about how the school and the industry could connect. That was the important thing, because otherwise you'd be doing things in school which wouldn't help you in the industry. So that's one of the things we talked about a lot.
I know you also were involved with the college in advising and mentoring students, right?
Yes. I really get pleasures out of that, to speak to young students. And I did, not only speak to a lot of students, but I spoke to some students. I tried to speak to, and a lot of the students that I spoke to were young men and not young women. And I was there because I thought that was a place for young women too. But it wasn't a big school at the time, but there were some good people there, and they were doing wonderful things. It still changes, and it's a great school.
Do you remember, did any of these people, did you keep in touch with them? Did they go on to go into the industry?
they didn't go into the people I'm talking about didn't go into the industry.
Oh, they didn't?
No, but they worked with the school. They passed away.
Oh, okay.
They were not young people.
Hmm. Ah, I see.
But students that you mentored and advised, did you?
Follow up with them?
Yeah, did you follow?
I stayed in touch with some, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Do you remember? You don't have to name their names, but do you remember what companies they went into, or did you?
Well, I think we used to take about 8 or 9 a day.
Oh, wow.
Leslie Fay. It was called Leslie Fay then.
Right.
Before Leslie Fay, I didn't answer a question you asked me.
Oh.
My father and his brother had a company called Pomerantz, Pomettte,
Right.
and they made those few things. And after the war, he left his brother in Pomerantz, and he went into Leslie Fay.
Hmm. Right.
And you were in charge of Joan Leslie for a while, right?
I was in charge of Joan Leslie after several years. I was living in Wilkes-Barre, had nothing to do with Joan Leslie. Joan Leslie was a new company, and when I came back to work in New York, I was going to a meeting, and the next thing I'm the head of Joan Leslie.
Now Joan Leslie was an actress. Did you ever meet her, or what was she like?
I met her a couple of times, but there were a couple of actresses we met. That's a very good question, and I can't remember the answer to them,
Okay.
fortunately. But
That's all right. That's fine.
but Joan Leslie was a line that was for the smaller person,
Hmm.
and it fit because those people, those kind of people, they wouldn't get a fit before. Now all of a sudden they got something that fit.
That's great.
It was great for them. We still make petite dresses.
In Leslie Fay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. The line is still around. People still talk about petites as a very important category of dresses.
Well, Leslie Fay today makes petites, regular sizes, and large sizes.
Right.
And I don't know if you know, but there's the history of Leslie Fay at the tail end of it was not a good history. About 10 years ago, I think it was. There was a fraud in the company, but about 2 years ago, my wife and I bought the name back.
Oh, that's good.
So it's actually owned by myself and my wife Laura.
Oh, that's great. And you still, where does the line go now? Where is it?
Well, the line is manufactured by a vendor, and that vendor pays a commission to me and sells Dillard's only.
Oh.
It's confined to Dillard's.
Yeah, why Dillard's? Just because?
Well, Dillard's there was a time when Alex Dillard, there were three brothers actually, and Alex Dillard told me one time, years after all the fraud happened with Leslie Fay, that he's never been able to replace the Leslie Fay business. So when I heard that, I spoke to my wife. We went and made a deal with Jay. From Ohio, okay, oh my God, it's a famous name too.
Oh.
And he sold us back the name. We shipped it the first season, and it wasn't good at all, and then we gave it to another company, and that company is doing well with it, and Dillard's doing well with it. But it's confined to Dillard's.
Right. You said in your earlier interview that confining to certain stores was very important for the line for the company.
Well, it's confined to Dillard's, and Dillard's has a lot of stores in a lot of towns, which makes it very difficult to sell another store.
Right.
But if there was a way to sell a store in the town that Village is not in, we'd have permission to do that. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. This is the second 2.5 years with Dillard's.
Right.
You also said in the earlier interview that the only constant in the fashion industry is change.
I know that's the way I feel, but I don't remember saying it. But that's the truth. You have to change.
Yes.
The change might be taking a button from here and putting the button here. That might be a change, but it cannot be what it was. It has to keep moving.
Good to know.
Maybe we could talk about if you remember some of your impressions of the people at the college. Do you remember Shirley Goodman, what she was like?
I do. I loved her. I mean, I'm not supposed to love other women, but I loved Shirley Goodman. She was great. She was like she taught me so much. She was great.
One particularly influential president of the college was Marvin Feldman. Do you remember Feldman? He came on in 1971.
1971. And he was younger than the rest of us. Not maybe not me, but the rest of the people. But he did a wonderful job, I thought. I'm pretty sure he did a wonderful job. He was a good guy. Yeah.
Do you remember any stories about him, or?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm sure I do, but I don't.
Under Feldman, the college began to grant bachelor's degrees, 4-year degrees.
I think so, yes.
Do you remember how you felt about that? Was that a good development for the school?
I felt good about it.
Yeah.
I felt that that's more of an education in 2 years. I did. I felt good. I felt good at that.
Did you ever meet Calvin Klein?
Yes, I did. I met Calvin Klein and had a lot of respect for him. I still have respect for him. His the clothes under the Calvin Klein label are selling very well. And there's a company that makes them that my wife is on the board of. So that's G3. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for what they're doing, and they're doing what he did.
Mm-hmm.
In 1986, the Fred Pomerantz building was named. Do you remember what inspired you to make the donation for that?
Building?
My father died in '84. I'm pretty sure it was '84. And he died at '84 in '84.
Wow.
And my wife Laura and I spoke about this, and we decided that that was a good thing to do. We did a few things. We started a Fred Pomerantz scholarship at the university, the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and we did this to FIT. And we did the FIT because FIT was his life, really. He loved it.
Wow.
And because of that, I loved it too. And what's nice is my wife Laura really was, anything we did, she was part of. And if she didn't want to do it, we wouldn't have done it.
Good.
That's part of being in a marriage, right? You have to...
Part of being in a good marriage.
A good marriage. Hear you.
So tell me, over the years, and since you've been associated with the college for so long, I mean, how do you think the college has changed over the years?
Well, there's new buildings, there's new, just physically, there's new ways to work the school. There's new courses. there's certainly new staff, and some of the staff really takes the college to the next spot. And I think it's constantly changing. And this president helps it change. She's been there a long time now, and she's great.
There been any surprising moments, or?
I don't have any surprising moments. I'm trying to remember what Leslie Fay did with the school. That was not just education. And they did. I think we did some outside, some social things that were outside, or inside, both.
Did the company sponsor internships for the students? And
we have about 5 students.
About 5 students, okay. All right.
Scholarships, not internships.
Oh, scholarships, huh? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Let's see.
Do you have any impressions of how the students have changed over the years?
I do. First of all, there's just many more of them. They come from different areas. It's more of an international school than it was then, which is a good thing for the school. But one of the things that I cared a lot about FIT was that it was a local, and it helped local kids, which it still does, by the way.
Yes. It's still a community college.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see.
So, how do you think the boards, the composition of the board, the people who are on the board, reflect these changes in fashion in the industry?
Well, there's the board of FIT, and then there's a foundation board, and I always been the head of the foundation. But I don't go to those meetings, and I don't know what happens at those meetings. I do know what happens at the board meetings of FIT, and I think the people that have the title of being a member of the board of FIT they really care about the school, and they do their best. Some of them do scholarships to get more people in there. They do feel very strongly about the board.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the foundation does too. It's just I'm not part of the foundation anymore.
Are you an emeritus?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I look like it?
Sure.
What would you like for people at FIT to remember about you?
I never think of that. But if just that I had the love of the school. I loved the school, and I think the school loved me too.
I think so.
But it was there were a few of us that really went out of our way for that school, and then there were others that were on the boards that didn't that helped, but they didn't go out of the way that we won.
Well, you've certainly won many awards and many recognitions over the years. The college thinks about you as a very important person to the.
And it's a good feeling, you know. I feel back the same way. But you were in my office next door, you said.
A whole wall of certificates and honorary diplomas.
And the nice thing about it is, because it didn't have to happen this way, but the nice thing about it is my wife has the same feeling.
Oh, that's great.
Does she have? She doesn't have a. She didn't work in the fashion industry, did she? Or
when we got married, her father had a chain of stores in the South, in Florida, and she worked for those stores. And then when she came to us, to Leslie Fay, we ended up starting a company called Breckenridge, and she was the head of it.
Oh.
Yeah, so she was the group head of the Better Goods, the Better clothes we had, because none of us knew anything about Better.
What was your price point in Leslie Fay?
In those days, it was probably a high price would have been $16.75.
Okay.
So how did you and your wife meet?
It's a long story and a good story, by the way. I was doing a fashion show for a company called Battlesteins it wasn't in Dallas then, it was in Houston, but it was a big store in Dallas too. And it seemed that she was married to someone that worked at Neiman's. Yes, at Neiman's. And so Battlesteins bought lines that Neiman's bought also. Anyhow, but so I was told about this girl whose husband and she just got divorced, and he was working at Neiman Marcus in Dallas, and she's moved back to Florida. My best friend was going to school in Florida. It was his birthday, and I took someone out from Bird Arms, and she said to me, I'll never forget it, she said, why would you take me out when you could take Laura Franzel out? That was the second time I heard it that weekend. And then I heard it again the third time. And what she said to her father, she was at Battlestein, excuse me, not Battlesteins, at Bird Arms. And she asked her father for some advice. And he said he didn't know that store, but they sold Leslie Fay, and his friend John Pomerantz runs it. So she called me to meet with me and invited her to lunch. And I proposed to her at the lunch.
Wow. The first time you met?
Because I had heard her name in so many different ways in a month.
That's amazing.
That was 42 years ago.
That's incredible.
For me, it is.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are there any questions is there a question you wish I would ask you that I haven't asked already?
No, you've done a good job.
Okay.
You did your job.
Okay. Karen, are there questions that you feel that we've missed?
I think we've done well.
Okay. Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you.
That was great, John. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.